So our first schedule is going to be for the first hour. We're going to have CAP Representative Ben Graff, who's going to be speaking to us about Central Arizona Project, what it is and what it does for us. We'll take a 10-minute break about 10 o'clock or so, and then we'll come back in and we'll have our second hour in which Dennis Rule will be talking to us about groundwater replenishment and some of the West Valley water issues, as well as answering some questions that some of our members had been sending in to me over the course of the last few weeks. So he'll be rolling that into his presentation as well. And then we'll, or is it going to be Ben? Is Ben going to roll? Between the two of them, they're going to answer those questions that were emailed in, one way or the other. Sorry about that. And then we're going to go on a 10-minute break, and we'll come back for hour 3. And hour 3 is going to be a panel discussion with representatives from the city of Avondale. We'll be talking about the water from a municipal point of view. So with that, I would like to introduce to you Ben Graff, who is a board member of CAP and also a land use and zoning attorney. So Ben, come on up.
I want to thank everybody for coming out this morning. It's great to see such a good turnout. Really appreciate it. I'm one of the newest members of the CAP board. The long name for that, which is fun when you're running for office, is the Central Arizona Water Conservation District Board. By the time you've knocked on somebody's door and told them what that acronym stands for, you've already lost their interest or made them wonder what the heck you're talking about. But this is actually really interesting stuff. This is the board, the CAWCD, or the Central Arizona Project. You're all familiar with it. You've seen the canals running, of course, through our city, through the state of Arizona, all the way from northern Arizona down all the way to Tucson and then even to Mexico. So this is an incredibly important source of water for Arizona. There's a 15-member board, so I'm one of 15 elected members of the CAWCD. We have 10 members represented at large from the Maricopa County. We have 4 from Pima County, and we have 1 from Pinal County. And if that wasn't complicated enough, our votes are also weighted. So each of our votes has a different weight depending on population. So our main purpose as a governmental entity is we are a taxing authority. The CAP system required an incredible loan or debt to the federal government for the construction of not only Navajo Generating Station, but of course the CAP canal itself. So we assess taxes to pay back that debt. And obviously we are in charge of the allocation and safe delivery through the system of Colorado River water to our customers, which include multiple entities, but probably for your interest, mostly cities are the customers that you would be most interested in terms of how we deliver that water and the importance of that water. So it is an elected body. We have over 400 employees. We have an amazing staff, Dennis, of which you will hear from today and others. And it's just been an honor for me in my first few months to serve on this board. It's been an interesting time, I will say. In just the first months, we went from a kind of a dire drought situation where we were going to hit some of these theoretical, not so theoretical, realistic points of drought in Lake Mead to having an amazing snowpack. So the snowpack came in towards the end of November through January. In some areas, it was record-breaking. California and other areas have seen some record snowpack. And it basically gave us a breather. I tell people I don't think it's a coincidence that I was elected in November, and then, of course, the snowpack came, shortly afterwards. So I made good on my promises for helping out the system. What I've been frustrated with, and it's not as much Arizona as I've seen in other areas, is you've heard what's happened in California. You heard what happened to the real estate market in terms of not being able to guarantee water supplies to certain outlying communities. And you know that California hit the point of actually having required reductions, not allowing people to have green yards. An interesting fact is one of the newest and upcoming businesses in California over the last couple of years, a few people did this, but there was a pair of brothers who made an incredible amount of money very, very quickly by getting a green spray paint approved by the EPA. And they came over to your dead yard and they just spray painted it green. And they did that all throughout California. So when you've got something like that happening, you know you're in dire straits. One of the things that has frustrated me is you see a lot of articles about the drought being over, or this entire message that we've been trying to straight out into the Southwest on conservation. The drought per se has a pause. We have some breathing room, but I don't like to spread the message that the drought is over or that we don't have a lot of conservation planning to do. So I'll get onto kind of the formal presentation, but I wanted to give you an introduction of who I am and some of the issues that are going on right now. This is our overall system map, as you can see, in terms of the overall flow of the canal and how that gets down to Maricopa County and brings water to our sources. It is an amazing feat of engineering. It really is. We take it for granted, but it's 336 miles of aqueduct. We have 14 pumping stations. And the reason for that is that for the grand majority, we are pumping water uphill. We are the single largest user of electricity in the state of Arizona because of that water that is pumped uphill at such a great feat. I just finished touring the Hetch Hetchy water system, which of course feeds San Francisco. That system is almost entirely gravity fed just because of the flow from the higher elevation down. We have a very different situation in Arizona, and you'll hear me talking about some of the energy issues as well. And really, this is the overall system, how that works. Again, you can see how it flows all the way down to the south. And the construction itself of this feat, starting and ending in the 80s, was over 20 years. So that, even in that time of technology, can tell you just how significant this really was in terms of a feat. You're all here really for this. This is the reason you're all here, is this slide. I have a lot of information to share, but our economy and the economies of so many states are directly linked to our water. And I want to even throw out the perception of our water. If any of you read Slate magazine, Time about once every 5 years likes to throw one of these things in there. There's this wonderful feeling out there, especially on the East Coast, that Phoenix and Maricopa County should not be here. We should have never developed. It's ridiculous. It's irresponsible, and that we're all just burning up water here left and right. And so the reality is that Arizona, especially as you dive into water issues and water policies and politics, as I have in the last few years, the reality is Arizona is one of the leaders, not only in water conservation, but as we'll also talk about, and Dennis will talk a bit about as well, in terms of recharging our underground aqueducts of water. There are states that have only recently, in terms of recent history, thought about doing this. The reason this slide is why you're here is because we cannot expand our home base. We certainly can't continue to create outward communities unless we have assured water supplies. And this goes as far as our companies. Our companies that come, let me just give you one, Intel and Chandler. Chandler brought in Intel, and one of the first things they looked at was what were the headlines and realities of our water supplies. Are we in dire straits? Are they going to be in a situation where they won't have the water they need to run their plant? And here's one of the interesting facts why that's so important to Intel. Intel not only uses water to clean their microchips, but they create something that is incredibly rare called pure water. It is so pure that it's not drinkable to humans. It's actually poisonous. It is completely devoid of any impurities, and the process to do that uses a lot of water, and it's incredibly important to businesses like Intel and others that we have that. So when we talk about what that impact is, we were even surprised internally. We, of course, knew that water has an incredible impact on our economy, but when we had this study done, when we found out that it was $100 billion per year, that even surprised internally some of our statisticians and our predictions. In any state, there is no more important economic driver than our water supply. It's taken for granted, but if you think about it, it's important. And then it's not so hard to take for granted if you think about things, even though it's slightly unrelated, but you think about water news such as Flint, Michigan. Not a lot of people are moving there. Not a lot of people are opening up new businesses, and it's a different system. It's a different problem than CAP entirely. It's really apples and oranges, but yet the perception of water is incredibly important to our economy. So again, there's two major systems. The board that I oversee looks directly at the lower basin system. We don't have any authority over the upper basin system, but we are certainly sisters and partners along the Colorado River. And that upper basin, as you can see, Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, Wyoming. We are talking about Arizona, Arizona, California, and Nevada. And that makes up the full allocation. Here's one of the things that probably a lot of you do know, but when the CAP system was first created, and just basically where Arizona was in terms of congressional delegation, political authority, political power, compared to California, and also in terms of population, we actually got the lowest order. This is an order of presenting to you where Arizona is first. But if I were to show you where our basic place in the hierarchy is, Arizona's at the bottom. We have the most junior rights to the Colorado River water. That 4.4 million acre feet to California is first priority right. And so all again, in theory, the river can, quote unquote, go dry for Arizona and Nevada, and California is still guaranteed its, 4.4 if that makes the rest of the system go dry to us. So that has always been the case. I always spin this as a positive. I like to brag to people about us being in the most junior position because I think it's one of the many reasons that we saw from a very early start that Arizona needed to be a water leader and a leader in taking that CAP, Colorado River water, and replenishing our aqueducts and our underwater systems. So I actually think that made us a little bit ahead of the game. This is more of psychology than science, but California has been sitting, fat and happy at the top of the food chain and has not been conserving water and planning ahead as well as I would argue Arizona has. So it's one of the reasons that you've seen some of the water issues there. This makes up the full demand, if you will, on the Colorado River system for the lower basin. And we'll talk about kind of the realities behind that and how that's resulted in some pressure and what we call the structural deficit on the Colorado River. Before we do that, these are our significant reservoirs. You hear about Lake Mead. You may hopefully start be seeing online. I forgot my pin today. It's kind of sacrilegious that I did. It's a Protect Lake Mead campaign. It's incredibly important. We're trying to bring to the public's attention that really the litmus test or the canary in the mine is the elevation of water in Lake Mead and how that relates to Lake Powell. But when you start hearing and seeing some of these slides about the elevation of water, when you hear an elevation of 1075, okay, that's actually one of the most important first elevation points. That's the elevation of water, that line right there. And you can see from the white, this is an example, you can see from the white the bleaching where the water line used to be. And we'll get into how that's changed over the years. But depending on the flow of snowpack and melt, we have releases from Lake Powell into Lake Mead, and this is kind of the joint, again, kind of sister-brother relationship between the two reservoirs. So you've heard about a shortage. We call it the structural deficit. We talk about basically the prediction and the point of when we know that there's going to be an actual shortage in terms of not being able to deliver or not being able to fill up Lake Mead based on how much water's been on the outtake. This is kind of an interesting point, not that all of you are going to be pulling CAP's declarations every August, but you might want to, because in August of every year, we make projected lake levels, and we can predict at that point, using our modeling, where we think the shortage would be. This could have a little bit of an indication on how that water could influence the real estate market, and whether or not you'll see more expansion. So that might be an interesting point at some point. You'd be above the curve, being agents and realtors and real estate investors, looking at that kind of projected data early on, but you'd be smart to do so. And we've been seeing the declines in Lake Mead again for over 15 years. It's about every year we go down about 12 feet. I'm a native, so I've been here my entire life, and it's amazing to think in terms of some of the reductions, whether you look at Lake Powell or Lake Mead, in terms of how fast that water's been going. If I was on a houseboat when I was in high school in the 90s, I would have been over 150 feet higher up in elevation than I would be today. It's pretty crazy when you think about it in those terms and how much the water has actually changed over time. And again, when you hear about this drought, it has definitely been a documented 17-year drought, and then we have an over-allocation system of structural deficit. So before I go into the details here, the easiest way to think about this is I've got a bowl of jelly beans, and it's a stagnant bowl of jelly beans, and every day I give away 10 jelly beans, but every day I only get 9. And so that one jelly bean is our structural deficit. I'm not getting in as many jelly beans as I'm giving out every day, and of course, eventually my bowl's going to run out. That's really what's been happening. Now, what actually has occurred here is when the guidelines were put into place in 2007, when we talked about how this whole system would work, when you have out-of-town clients or people talk about what is the deficit, why are we losing water? Well, the drought is a factor. But an even larger factor, even without the drought, is the fact that when we allocated the approximate 9 million acre feet of water, and if everybody, I'll just say this real quick, just in case, an acre foot of water, you take an acre of land and turn the walls of that acre of land into a 1 foot tall aquarium, okay? And you fill it with water. So you've got an acre large aquarium that's 1 foot high. That's how we've been measuring water based on an agricultural use for quite some time. So 9 million acre feet of water is the average inflow. Our overall allocation is around 9 million acre feet. We did not take into account evaporation, which is about 600 million or 600,000 acre feet, and then also system loss, whether that be evaporation, seepage, other types of losses through the system. And so, in the end of the day, that one jelly bean that I'm telling you about is the 1.2 million acre feet. That's what we are not compensating for on a daily basis, even without a drought. And so that's been an issue for some time, and the best way to tackle that is through conservation. And there's various models of how we can address that 1.2 acre feet through conservation, so that we're only allocating what we need. But if you add the drought into the factor, it becomes much more complicated. So again, we've talked about the 12 feet per year. It's incredibly visible. It's not a slow attack at all on our water resources. You can see it every year. And then that's 4 feet Lake Mead every year. And then basically we are moving toward and have been experiencing a great shortage. Now, again, for this crowd, for the crowds that I talked to when I was running for office, the last thing you want to do is run any kind of scare tactics or show a picture of like a Mad Max movie with no water and everybody fighting for fuel. That's not where we're at. Again, a lot of it because of our water conservation, because of how we've recharged water. You'll talk about one of the questions that came up was, and I'll just address that now. One of the questions that was submitted early was basically, how are cities accounting for the water that they save? And so overall, across Arizona, we've placed 10 million acre feet of water underground in storage, whether in credits or actually they turn into credits, but we've stored that water underground by recharging it. And if you've seen these, you've probably driven by one. It's not any more complicated than a slightly recessed basin where we've done the geological studies. We know that underground it can seep down into the ground, but these aren't man-made structures underneath. These are the natural aqueduct structures, and we've been taking CAP water or unused water or the city's unused water, and we've been recharging our groundwater, and cities get credit for that. We have 4 million acre feet that's not Arizona-wide that accommodates about, or that represents about the 4 million acre feet that cities have obtained credits for in terms of putting water into the ground. So that's water underground that cities have access to if they need to. And that's one of the reasons why we've been generally very responsive users of water, or responsible users of water. But we're not ignoring the deficit, we're not ignoring the drought, and we're looking at ways to compensate for that. So basically, what's not fun about my presentation is you get to see a lot of graphs of lines going drastically down. That is, of course, the story that we've been telling throughout this entire presentation in terms of where we're at for water usage and overall drought, deficit, and shortage. But we have, given our current status, the red is the projected of where we would be in 2017. And then basically these are the elevations. And as I'll show you, 1075 is the first trigger point where Arizona starts losing water. And I'll jump to that in a minute. Luckily, because of the snow melt, we did not hit the 1075, and we've got some breathing room. So let me talk about this a little bit. Why this 1075 number, whether you're hearing it on the radio, whether you're studying yourself, is so important is when we made the 2007 guidelines and we all agreed to the allocation of water, the 4.4 million acre feet to California, 2.8 to Arizona, 1.5 to Mexico, and also 0.3 or 300,000 acre feet to Nevada. We also came up with these guidelines of theoretical points of elevation on Lake Mead that would trigger conservation and would trigger cuts to water. Arizona, being in the most junior position, agreed to the level of 1075. And once we hit that and below, Arizona is required through the guidelines to give up 320,000 acre feet of water. And most of that would impact agricultural uses in Pinal County. But again, why this is incredibly important is we can outline where the cut would occur. It won't really impact cities. It will only impact agriculture in Pinal. You can say all these things, which are all factually true, but the Times Magazine, the Slate Magazine, all of the economic perception, psychology of water in Arizona, I think would be hit pretty hard if we hit this point. And we've come incredibly close. I think we were within 2 feet, is that right, Doug? Yeah, I think we were within 2 feet, 1 feet at the base of the drought. And so what has always concerned me about this as we were hitting this, and as I was campaigning, we were heading right for going below 10,000, that 175, is just the psychology of that and the headlines that Arizona's hit 1075 and we're taking water cuts and we're losing water. But it is a significant point. It wouldn't impact the cities immediately, but I think there'd be a lot of headlines. This is the full accounting for how this occurs as the water goes down specifically for Arizona. We don't have another hit until 1050. We lose 400K. At 1025, we lose 480. And then the reason there's this point is the Secretary of the Interior, if the easiest way to look at one of the Secretary's jobs is to protect the health of the Colorado River. And the Secretary, for all intents and purposes, has the ability to jump in and say that those 2007 guidelines, those were cute, that's nice, Arizona, California, Nevada, that's great, you had these ideas, but now the health of the Colorado River is in danger, and I'm going to step in and reallocate. And then this is important too, because at 1025, we start to lose the ability to continue to generate electricity, not across the state, but the electricity that is generated through hydropower. And then, just to keep things really calm, we always call this the dead pool. I always like that phrase. But that's common in any water system. It's referred to as the dead pool. But when I first heard that, I always thought, well, that's a good way to keep everybody really calm when we run down to the water. So obviously, we're nowhere near any of these. We're still hovering above 1075. And of course, the whole goal is to keep us above here in perpetuity or for as long as absolutely possible. So what are we doing to stay above 1075? What are we doing to address the structural deficit? And so we need to adapt. We need to create ways of keeping Lake Mead at a high level of elevation, of keeping our water uses to a minimum where necessary. And so we've looked at an amazing amount of storage and recovery. I think I went over that, but that is how cities get their water credits, through basically taking their unused portions of their allocation as our customer and placing that underground in aquifers. Augmentation, basically is additional supplies of water or additional sources of water. And then, we've continued to look at various programs for conservation. And the one that's been hitting the most headlines right now, the one that you can read about, you can come to the CAP website and take a look at what we've been working on, is the DCP, or the Lower Basin Drought Contingency Plan. And this has been an overall effort to look at how we can reallocate and protect our water sources. And this takes a lot of coordination with multiple agencies, not only CAP, but other sources of water. Obviously, there's other departments, Arizona Department of Water Resources. We haven't talked about the other sources of water in Arizona. You're all familiar with SRP. And basically, we are working on and the reason it's pending is we got that breathing room. We didn't need to implement DCP immediately under an emergency standpoint because we did get that snowpack. Again, I'm arguing don't tell people the drought is over. Tell people we have some breathing room to talk about how to best conserve water and how to protect Lake Mead. Basically, we have another graph that's showing basically the forecast of the rivers. 2017 is in the green line, and I know that that's difficult to see. But basically, we have a little bit more of a positive outlook on this. This year, because of the snowpack, we are going to have a 9 million acre-foot release. That's good news. That covers the water that needs to be allocated. But that doesn't change the structural deficit. That doesn't change the evaporation. That doesn't change the overall structural deficit of that 1.2 million acre feet that we were discussing. A little bit about DCP. So this really does start with the Bureau of Reclamation, and we basically have identified all the different ways that we can, again, bend that curve. We can keep ourselves from getting below the 1075. So the positive news for you in this group from an economic standpoint is no one is asleep at the wheel. Everyone is working on this. This drought has been moving towards us for 17 years. I am impressed on a daily basis with the staff at CAP and other water experts. Again, I'm a land use and zoning attorney. I work with development and rezonings and variances and setbacks. I'm not a hydrologist, and I am surrounded by water experts and people that have been looking at this problem for a long time. And again, the confidence I have in the system and in CAP and in our water leaders statewide in terms of what we're doing to avoid disaster is incredible. So we're looking at this drought contingency plan. We're looking at how that can be incorporated, improved tweaked now that we have some of the time to think about exactly how we want to address the issues. This again is kind of outlining some of those issues. The thing that's interesting too about DCP that is the biggest challenging point, and I have some slides on this, is DCP not only talks about what we're going to do in Arizona, it addresses the entire lower basin state contingency. And the most important thing we need to do if we're going to save water is we all need to agree to take some of these cuts earlier in the process. So we talked about how 1075 is when Arizona takes the 320,000 acre foot reduction. Arizona included, and California and Nevada, under the DCP process, if it came to a full agreement, we would all take cuts earlier, including California would need to volunteer to take cuts that they otherwise would not have taken. Now, the question that always comes up is, why? Why would California do this? Why would California in its most senior position agree to give up any water that it wouldn't have to? Well, that in my mind and a lot of other factors comes back to the Secretary of the Interior. Again, that authority of the federal government to step in a severe drought situation and reorganize our allocations. I look at that as the carrot that all three states, it's kind of a carrot you want to avoid, actually. So I guess it's a scary carrot that you're running away from. And so you're basically trying to make sure that the three of us, the three states, can continue to govern ourselves in terms of this water agreement. So this chart, it basically outlines how this would occur. You can see here under these guidelines, you can see how California basically gets to take 0 cuts under the plan. But if this is the original plan, sorry, right here, all the way through all of these reductions down to 1025. Remember, the water can run dry to Arizona, and California isn't taking any cuts. They're getting their 4.4 million acre feet. But under the plan, you would start to see instead of 1075 for us being the first trigger, we're actually at 1090. We would agree to take an immediate cut of 192,000. But the positive side is you get to see that California would start to take minimal cuts much earlier on. And that would be, again, contrary to their senior water rights. So I don't want to get too deep into this because it gets a bit technical, but the concept is that the three states come together, they come up with a drought contingency plan, we agree to take cuts earlier for the benefit of the future water supply to keep us all far away from the dead pool and far away even from some of those middle standpoints where we impact hydrological power or are not feeding water any of Arizona's agricultural interests, any of those kinds of darker scenarios. So this I won't go through every single one of these, but these are basically all of the steps that are still left to be done. You'll be reading about this, you'll be monitoring it. Again, the CAP website is phenomenal. So if you're interested, if you have clients that are interested, if you have clients that are concerned about moving to Arizona because of future water supply, they shouldn't be. They should be very, very impressed with Arizona's water management. And any of the articles or information that we post basically on those next steps are always available online. And then I think the projection is that we hope to finalize the agreement by 2018. That would be the ideal timeline right now, but that's not set in stone. And again, that is to assure that if the drought continues, if the snowpack that we had this year is an anomaly, and we don't continue to see that in the future years, that we do have a plan for all of that. We have a system use agreement in place, and this is just to let you know a little bit about that. This was one of those things that's kind of funny because the board had been working on this for like 10 years, and then I came in and I was elected in January. or on the board in January, and then on February 2nd, we passed it, and it was this big historical moment, and I got to be in the picture, and I'm like, so I can't personally take credit for all the work that staff and the CAP board members put into this, but it was an incredible process. And it really, it basically created some solidity in some of these issues. One of the interesting things too, the one that I'll point out that's just kind of interesting is you hear this concept of water wheeling, and it didn't start water wheeling, it didn't create water wheeling, it set forth some framework. Basically what that is right now the CAP system, those canals, every drop of water in the canal system is Colorado River water and nothing else. We cannot at this point interject any other types of water, sources of water into the CAP canal system. But there's a lot of benefits to water wheeling, which is the process of bringing in third-party sources of water. So we're looking at that as well. So this is just something that's kind of new, improved, and is really assisting the entire process. Minute 32, when you hear about this, what you really need to know about minute 32 on these two slides, and I'll go back, this is our agreement with Mexico in terms of our water treaty, in terms of our sharing of water, which has resulted in the 1.5 million acre feet of Colorado River water that goes down through the CAP system down to Mexico. The great news is, as a result of, I think, the good faith and the ability to work with Mexico on this overall agreement, Mexico is also on board with the drought contingency plan. They're also willing to take cuts along with Arizona and California. In that agreement that we finalized in 2018, we're confident that Mexico is going to be a partner in preserving that water and helping with the overall drought as well. So again, you'll hear about minute 319. Trying to see if I put that up there. Minute 319 is what I was just talking about. It's basically an amendment. A minute is an amendment to a treaty. And so this is a federal treaty. And the minute 319, if you ever read about that or hear about it, that was all of us agreeing, or Mexico agreeing to shortage sharing as well as protecting certain environmental flows. And then I think I've hit most of this. Let's talk about NGS for a bit. You hopefully have heard some of this in the news. It was pretty heavily covered. So again, going back to what I was saying, about 336 miles of canal, mostly going uphill, 14 pumping stations, #1 user of electricity in Arizona, single user. The NGS is the coal-fired plant on the Navajo reservation. It creates about 80% of the electricity that we need for the CAP system. It was built along with the CAP canal and finished in the 1980s. It was built for the purpose of pumping this water. We thought at the time it was a very, very positive and lucrative investment in that the world was dependent, still is, but the world was clearly dependent on the source of coal-fired energy, and coal-fired energy was not cheap. And so we believed that we could fund or create the electricity that we needed for the CAP system, and then we could sell the excess energy to pay off that federal debt that we owe for the CAP canal system and for the construction of NGS. What has occurred, and what really all of these slides is about, is there's multiple factors. Some are environmental, some are governmental regulations, but also the market for coal-fired energy has basically plummeted, and natural gas is incredibly cheaper. So the demand for coal-fired energy is simply not there, and we are not selling that quote-unquote excess energy that we had hoped for. The owners of the Navajo generating station, which does not include CAP, we are not an owner, but we are the customer, almost the only customer for NGS. The owners recently decided that they may close NGS this year or next year, when original projections were around 2044 for this plant to go down. Why this is important has a few direct issues to CAP and one major kind of policy issue that I think is important to know about. Basically, the major issue is obviously if NGS goes away, our main source of electricity is no longer there. Again, just like the water issues I've been telling you about, there's nothing to panic because we have been looking at and studying, and CAP has been looking at alternative sources of energy for years. And there is a very clear path for us to create a more diversified portfolio of energy to pump the water and even have the opportunity for some renewable energy resources, which I'm actually excited about. This slide tells you that story. So $81 million from NGS, that's what it cost us in 2016. If we had just been using the energy from the Palo Verde nuclear plant, it would have cost, the same energy would have cost us $42.7 million. And that's just looking at that's not even looking at a diversified portfolio. That's just looking at one alternative source of energy, nuclear power. So clearly, NGS for us is not the most cost-effective use, but it has been the most convenient, and it was the intended use. What I always like to point out, just from the policy standpoint, again, being an Arizona native, having traveled all around Arizona, and being somewhat familiar with some of the tribal issues, is unfortunately we're talking about almost 1,000 jobs that are not gone overnight, but are gone pretty quickly when NGS goes away, and those are Native American held jobs. So if there was a story of 1,000 jobs going away in Phoenix or Chandler and Tempe, you could be sure that that would be on the front page of the paper. And this is getting a lot of attention, but again, it's not a water issue, it's not an energy issue, it's a policy issue with our Native American communities. And it has been at the forefront of the governor's office and other task forces that are looking at this. But I think it's important to know it's CAP, although from a budget standpoint and energy standpoint, we are fine with the change. Everyone is very conscious about the person factor, the employment factor in this as well. So we've created a task force that I sit on, an energy task force. That's the last bullet point. We're specifically looking at what it would mean to take our entire system off of NGS, coal-fired power, and create a more diversified approach. If you go back and just visualize that first slide of the canal system going and weaving down from the north to the south, there are various energy sources that are fairly convenient along that line, in addition to more obvious sources and some renewable sources that we hope to incorporate. So the number one importance to you and to the community, and again to anyone who's investing in Arizona is, is there enough redundancy and protection so that we don't have power outages and water isn't delivered to Arizona? So from the projections I've seen, we can create the same redundancies and protections, if not more, and a diversified energy portfolio than what we have today. But again, when people are looking at Arizona and they're looking at water, there's an energy factor. I knew of the energy issues, but I have spent an equal amount of time studying energy as I have water since I started my term on the CAP board. And that's actually been pretty exciting. I've been very happy about that diversity. So we talked about this. This is something that we're here to solicit all your help with as well. We want people to be talking about the issues more. Water is such an easy thing for us to take for granted, and again, it's one of those philosophical issues. We don't want to live in a society that's wondering whether their faucet's going to turn on in the morning. None of us want that. That's obviously an environment where no one's taking water for granted, and every day you're concerned, and we're all very much aware of water. We don't want to live in a society like that. But I also don't think we want to live in a society especially in the desert and with some of the issues I've shown you today, where we're not water conscious and we're not finding ways to conserve within our daily lives, and also and how to support some of the larger efforts like the drought contingency plan. So part of what I'm trying to do, what our amazing staff is doing, and a lot of the other elected board members is why I'm here today. In addition to why I speak to all kinds of groups. And on that note, if you have smaller groups, if you have any homeowners associations, anyone that would like someone from CAP or myself to come out and speak at some of these issues, that's exactly what we're here for. I really wanted to be out and speaking with the public more. And so one of the things we need help with is spreading the word about the Protect Lake Mead campaign. There's all kinds of materials you can give out to small groups if you're part of any groups that are interested in environmental, water conservation issues. Again, all that information is on our website. And just overall, it is just bringing awareness to not only what we need to do to conserve, but also what we should be proud about in Arizona. The things that you, as realtors and real estate professionals, should be bragging about to your clients and to out-of-state folks and to investors, that we have truly done something amazing here in Arizona. Again, with every time that I talk about a place where you need to conserve water, also keep in mind that there's these wonderful stats out there, like the city of Phoenix has a 10-year supply of water stored underground through their credits and through other efforts. And again, it's one of those sci-fi scenarios, but if you were to put Phoenix in a bubble, they theoretically have 10 years of water without an extra drop of exterior water coming in. Now, there's a lot of other factors, and that wouldn't work exactly like that, but that's an impressive stat. That being said, 10 years is not that long at all, and that's why we need to look at longer programs. But again, I try to get us away from the headlines of Phoenix should have never been here, or Maricopa County should have never been here, to what are we doing right, and the states that are actually starting to probably copy us, if you will, which we want, because we want nationwide water conservation and efforts. The other thing that's really interesting, and who's seen the movie The Big Short? So I won't ruin the movie, although everybody knows the story, especially if you're a realtor. But that story is about the financial gurus who predicted the recession and obviously bet against the market because they predicted it. One thing that's really interesting is at the end of that movie, when you read the last couple things, when they say Susie went on and married somebody and bought a dog and this happened and this happened. The main character in there that was kind of the genius that saw all of this coming. The last thing in that movie it says is, and I'm forgetting his name, but it says that he has started to move all of his oil and other investments into water. And I see that as that's a scary fact, because we only invest in things that are scarce. And we only invest in things the value of which is going up. And if you watch that movie, you feel like that guy can see things coming. So on a worldwide basis, we need to do everything we can so that water doesn't become the next investment commodity, such as oil. Water is something that needs to be, not to get on my high horse and sound like, too environmentalist, but it's obviously something that needs to be shared by our planet. So I'm going to stop there. I think I've got some time left for some questions, anything that may have come up. And if I can't answer it, there's some other wonderful people here from CAP that might be able to cover for me. So, yep.
When you see the water treatment station, how do they operate? Is it like a reverse osmosis where you spend water to clean water? Number one. And on those leach basins that we see, that's probably been the effluent water.
So the water, I'll go in reverse order. The water that is put down into the ground, it has to be to certain standards, but it doesn't have to be potable or drinkable water. So the water that's seeped back down into our aquifers, is typically not drinkable water. That would be a waste. Most of it is some form of affluent water, but it certainly doesn't have anything that would impact or pollute the groundwater. Our earth and the various layers of sediment, charcoal, everything that's natural in our dirt is one of the absolute best filters we have. So as long as the water is to a certain standard, doesn't have toxic chemicals in it, gasoline, things like that, it will seep down and be naturally filtered into very, very clean water. The water treatment plants, they vary in terms of how those are used. I mean, I think our representative from Avondale can kind of talk about how that works. Again, CAP is not, we deliver the water at a certain quality to the cities, but your cities are the ones that actually treat that water to the drinkable standard that comes out of your faucet. So a lot of it is similar to a reverse osmosis, and it goes through various chains of getting the larger particles down to the smaller particles toward and chemical treatment, chlorine, all of those items. So it varies per city, but the process is pretty similar. Yes?
I have two questions. First of all, your comment about water becoming valuable material. Can you tell me why the city of Phoenix purchased all the water rights from the farmers out in the Wicked and Sloan area in Arizona?
I'm actually not familiar with that. I couldn't. The question was, there was a purchase of water by the city of Phoenix of some agricultural areas, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
My second question is, what are you doing to police water reclamation?
To what?
To police
Oh, police.
water reclamation?
In what manner?
I'm from Wickenburg, and we have a new subdivision out there
Mm-hmm.
called Trilogy. And they do not reclaim the water, so they're using our groundwater for their golf courses and for everything.
So yeah, in Arizona, basically there's various uses that, like golf courses for the most part, pretty profoundly have been using not drinkable water, but forms of reclaimed water. It maybe doesn't go to your answer of policing, but I think one of our proudest feats, especially in the Phoenix area, of the use of reclaimed water that's runoff water, is the fact, and a lot of people don't realize this, but the Palo Verde nuclear plant is not only the largest nuclear plant, but it is the only one in existence in the world that's not located next to a large body of water. And it's kind of a scary fact if you think about it, because the reason is the redundancy of, if everything goes wrong, at least we can flood the chambers with salt water or lake water, whatever it is, and stop a meltdown. So in Arizona, as you know, the Palo Verde is completely in the middle of nowhere. We have created that alternative source of water through reclaimed water. So an incredible amount of Phoenix's effluent and reclaimed water is going to Palo Verde for that use. So it's a really ingenious and inventive way for us to use reclaimed water. Maybe some of my cohorts might know of other ways of policing or
I just think that, when a subdivision like that is planned and approved, that would be a primary request that they not use the groundwater.
well, yeah, and in some, it basically comes to where you're at. If you're in an active management area in Arizona and Maricopa, Pima, and Pinal counties, in terms of groundwater use, you're basically working with CAP to replenish that water. Okay, and there are regulations that cover that. If you're outside of the active management areas, if you're in La Paz County, we don't have reclamation or recharge requirements statewide for those areas, and there is no regulation. You can use your groundwater as you see fit, and there are some interesting YouTube videos and articles about some of the Middle Eastern countries that have come into La Paz County, bought up farmland, and they're now building giant farms to grow their alfalfa for their cows back in Middle East because they've depleted all of their groundwater. So it's still financially viable for them to come all the way to Arizona, use our groundwater. And again, everything they're doing is legal. Remember, everything they're doing is legal. They're in La Paz County. They can use the groundwater. But you'll see, if any of you have ever heard of the subsidence that can occur in most extreme, there are places in the Middle East where the water has been, the groundwater has been used to such depletion that the ground has concaved, and it can concave by hundreds of feet, because that water pressure is actually keeping up the ground that we stand on. So it kind of depends on where you're at, but it is one of those things. And again, maybe one of the things I should have pointed out too, even though I named the 3 counties, the board I sit on and the underground storage and reclamation and recharge that we govern and that we promote, again, it's only for that center, most populous area of Arizona. The exterior areas are still unregulated for groundwater, and it is a continuing issue.
Well, it's interesting because the trilogy is in Yavapai County. We're in Wickenburg,
Mm-hmm.
Maricopa County, and we annexed that. So,
Gotcha.
can you come talk to us?
Sure. Yeah. Be one of those guys from Maricopa County telling us what to do with our water. Yeah, exactly. Go ahead.
So underwater or underground taking excess water from the city, is there a measurement on when that would be full or halfway full or not even close to full?
So your question is going to raise more questions. It's a great question because the answer to that is yes. I mean, again, the hydrologists are very much aware through various forms of radar and measurement how large the underground aquifers or caves are. So yes, there are ways for us to measure that. We still have an incredible amount of room. Where some of the questions that come up, and your question's great because we're not sure if the water stays, exactly where it's put. There's different ways. And again, trained hydrologists look at this and they can follow the water, but is the water truly underneath there or has it moved into another aquifer? And then we don't technically have, under today's standards, an ability to pull that water out if we needed it today. So there's a lot of infrastructure and well systems that would need to be built to utilize all that water if we were becoming solely dependent again on that, or even 25% dependent on that in the case of a significant drought. So it's not at all willy-nilly. It's an incredible amount of science and calculation, and there's plenty of room for that recharge. But the issue will be when we need to have the infrastructure and well system to get to some of that water.
Okay, with that, please thank Ben for coming and give us the presentation. 10-minute break. Okay, we are going to go ahead and start with our next representative from CAP, who's going to be covering groundwater replenishment. He's the manager of the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District. Name is Dennis Rule. And he will also be co-presenting with Andrew Craddock, who's an analyst for the Groundwater Replenishment District for CAP. So with that,
Okay.
Dennis Rule.
All right. Good morning. Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Also with us is Jessica Fox. She's a senior policy analyst for CAGRD. So if you have any real deep questions, hopefully she can help on some things. Unlike Director Graff, I am not an Arizona native. I grew up and went to school in East Tennessee and in New Orleans. So we had kind of the opposite issue with water, too much of it. But I have been in Arizona for over 30 years, and I've spent over 30 years in the water industry in the state of Arizona. I was with the Tucson Water Department for over 20 years. I've been with Central Arizona Project for the last 8 years, and 4 of those have been as the CAGRD manager. Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District manager. Let me see. Now, can I get it into the next PowerPoint from here? But if I could, just real quickly, I mean, the name kind of gives you a little hint about what we do, but just to get a sense of the room, how many people here feel that they really know a lot about the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District and what it is and what it does, and particularly what it might mean to the real estate business? Okay, I saw one wave from somebody in the water business back there, but as far as otherwise, basically you've never really heard of it before, and you don't know what it does. Would that be a good? Okay, well, hopefully I'll try to make this not as boring as we usually are in the water business when we're talking about what we do, because it's technical, it's complicated, there are a lot of laws, there are a lot of contracts, and we really get into all the details that just bore everybody else to death. So I'm going to try to stay fairly high level with this, but also be able to kind of put it in context as to what we do. So let me talk about a few acronyms that you'll see. We use acronyms a lot because we don't like to say words, we just say things that people don't understand, and that makes it sound smart, right? Anyway, ADWR, that's the Arizona Department of Water Resources. They are the state agency that actually has regulatory authority over water use within the state. To the question about the use of reclaimed water versus groundwater, actually those issues are ADWR issues. They're the ones that manage both within the active management areas. They do have authority to regulate the use of groundwater. But outside, as Director Graff talked about, there is not statewide management of groundwater. So it's very different in the central and southern Arizona area as it is from the rest of Arizona. Acre foot of water, Director Graff already talked about that. Basically, it's 1/3 of a million. 3 acre feet of water is about 1 million gallons of water. To put that in the context of a household use, typically a household of 4 people might use around 1/4 to 1/3 of an acre foot of water per year for basically indoor water use and maybe a little bit of turf and a pool. But usually you'd have 3 to 4 houses that over a course of a year would use about an acre foot of water. We'll talk about AMDs. Those are annual membership dues for the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District. We're kind of like a club. We have members. AWS, Assured Water Supply, that is the state program for particularly urban water users being able to show that they have a long-term reliable water supply. CAGRD, again, is Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District. CAP, Central Arizona Project. Another acronym, CAWCD, these are all the same thing, Central Arizona Water Conservation District. And I'll try to explain a little bit about how we fit in particularly. We use the term M&I a lot, which is municipal and industrial water use as opposed to agricultural water use, typically is the distinction that we use there. You'll see MLs, which are member lands, CAGRD member lands. MSAs are CAGRD member service areas. I'll explain what those are. And then NIA stands for Non-Indian Agricultural Priority Water. It's a lower priority even within the CAP water. It's the first water that gets, besides excess CAP water, the first water that gets cut during a shortage. So relative to what CAGRD is related to the CAP, basically we're one and the same, even though our name has district in it. We're not really a separate district. We're really just a function within the broader CAP organization. We were created by state statute as special functions for CAP in 1993. We serve essentially the same area, primarily the counties of Maricopa, Pinal, and Pima. But we are funded by our members. Our members, as Director Graff noted, every real property owner within the 3-county service area pays ad valorem taxes to CAWCD. It's part of what was set up in order to repay the federal government for the cost of the Central Arizona Project Canal. Our members, the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District members, are just like everybody else that owns property within that 3-county area. But in addition to paying for the property taxes, they also pay all of the cost of what we do on behalf of them. And I'll talk a lot more about this, but basically this slide just shows what really is the most important thing for what we're related to, which is that in the major urban areas, the state of Arizona requires municipalities, primarily urban uses, to show that they have a 100-year long-term renewable water supply. Historically, a lot of the water use by a lot of the cities, and also particularly by agriculture, was on groundwater, what we call mined groundwater, pumping groundwater out of the aquifers in excess of how much is replenished. But in 1980, the state passed what's called the Groundwater Management Act, which was to regulate groundwater use within these primary areas within the state. And this slide is an example of why. If you look, you'll see, try to make sure I've got the right button here. This is, I can't remember whether this individual was with the Arizona Geological Society or the U.S. Geological Society, but he's a geologist. He's standing on a road. This is near Luke Air Force Base in the West Valley. And up here at the top of the sign, it says 1957. This is where groundwater levels were in 1957. And down here is the groundwater level in 1991. So this is 34 years. This is over 20 feet that the land subsided from 1957 to 1991 because of groundwater pumping. So if you think about it in the context of a home, about the time the homeowner has paid off a 30-year mortgage, his house has dropped 20 feet. And that causes problems in a lot of ways. So let me explain a little bit about the aquifers here. I am a hydrologist. I'm not a practicing hydrologist. I'm a practicing water policy person or water management person, but I have a geology and hydrogeology background. But the aquifers in this part of the state, we're in what's called the Basin and Range topographic region of the United States. And what you have here is the valleys where, Phoenix is, are actually bedrock that's been dropped relative to the mountains over eons, over geologic time. And as those valleys have dropped down, the mountains have eroded and sediments have been placed that fill the valleys to the depth of thousands and thousands of feet. At the same time that these sediments eroded, it was by whatever rain there has been geologically in the area. So you have groundwater that is also entered into the aquifer system. So an aquifer, a good way to think about it in a way might be it's a bathtub full of gravel and sand that's filled up with water below the surface, but you have water in between the sand and gravel, the sediments that are in the basin. Because they were deposited at the same time, you have a certain amount of support effect from the water that's in all these pore spaces with all the sediments. And what happens when you pump that water out is that depending upon what the sediments are, they can collapse, and they can collapse a lot. You can have an entire valley floor drop over a large area by 20, 30 feet or more. You can have one part drop and another part stay in place, which is not real good if you have infrastructure, roads, sewer lines, water systems, whatever, that cross that. You can have large fissures that open up. Down in Pinal County in particular, there are huge fissures where people lose cattle all the time. They're tens, if not hundreds of feet deep. And so it causes a lot of problems. It also gets more expensive to pump as the water levels go down. And because the water has been in contact with the minerals for a very long time, the water quality at the lower levels is very poor, very highly mineralized water. It can be treated expensively and used for potable, but it's very expensive. So anyway, this is one of the primary reasons why in 1980, the state put in place these requirements that cities should have a long-term water supply to show that they're viable over time. Just to give a little bit of background, by the time the state put in place the rules that would apply for cities to be able to show that they have a long-term water supply, the Central Arizona Project, the water that was available out of the Central Arizona Project was allocated out in the early 80s. And it was in the mid-90s when the state actually promulgated these assured water supply rules that made it very clear that essentially if you didn't have a right to Colorado River water through the CAP, you were going to have difficulty showing that you had an assured water supply. That didn't go over very well with a lot of smaller towns. Most of the CAP water got allocated to the large East Valley cities, Phoenix, Scottsdale, Chandler, Mesa. They got very large allocations of CAP water. In the East Valley or in the West Valley, much, much smaller or none. I think, both in the Tucson area and in this area, if you think about the town of Marana, city of Buckeye, back in 1980, both of those were very small farming communities. They had future growth plans, but they didn't have very much population. They couldn't really afford to subcontract for a lot of CAP water, so they didn't. But in the 90s, when the assured water supply rules were put together by the state, it became very clear that that communities like that didn't have CAP water. They couldn't demonstrate an assured water supply under those rules. In 1993, the state created what's called the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District, which is our function, in order to make it possible for at least the majority of those communities, or many of those communities, to have an assured water supply to demonstrate assured water supply. So what we really do as the Groundwater Replenishment District is, if there are parties like Buckeye, like Marana, that do have physical access to groundwater, but they don't have renewable water supplies, we allow them to get a designation of assured water supply from the state by us replenishing the aquifer after they pump the groundwater out. So we're a replenishment district. Our members pump groundwater, they use groundwater for the growth and development, and then we put that water back in the ground. We put other water in the ground to replace that, so that we make their use of groundwater consistent with the assured water supply rules by the state. And again, our members pay us to put that water back in the ground. So how we work is our members have to report to us every year how much excess groundwater they use. That's a technical term that defines, but basically how much groundwater they pump and consume. They report that to us. We then assess them a cost to go get additional water and put it back in the aquifer on their behalf. We use the money that we get from them to purchase these water supplies that we replenish the aquifer with. And we don't deliver water to any homes. We do not deliver potable water at all. The only water that we deliver basically is to the aquifer. And I'll explain a little bit about how we do that. If you can see on the left here is kind of a slice that shows what a typical aquifer is in Arizona. I would just say, you need to think these are huge. These aren't underground lakes, these aren't underground rivers, but basically they're large basins with a huge amount of water in them, tens of millions of acre feet of water. But again, it's a finite amount. And when you look at, in particular, some of these large cities, large irrigation districts that have a lot of pumps that pump a lot of groundwater, you can deplete that aquifer. Again, it's a big reservoir, but it can ultimately be depleted. On the right-hand side this is one of the replenishment basins, recharge basins that we use to replenish. Basically, they're an engineered, again, a shallow basin where you put water out into the basins and you allow it to infiltrate into the ground. It is an engineered process. The hydrologist, there are monitoring wells that are associated with that. You can see the water levels in the aquifer rise as a result of the replenishment. You can actually look at the water chemistry of the water. You can look at how much native groundwater there is versus how much CAP water, say, or effluent it's been recharged. So, it is a technical process. It is a well understood and well known process. And we're able to verify that we actually do the replenishment and that it does reach the aquifer. In the West Valley, we use a number of replenishment facilities. What I showed you there was what we call a direct recharge project. That's where we actually deliver water into these basins and put them directly into the ground. And we have three of those in the West Valley. One is called the Hieroglyphic Mountain Recharge Project. Another is the Agua Fria Recharge Project. These two are immediately adjacent to the CAP canal. So we can take water out of the CAP canal, put them into the recharge projects, and recharge the aquifer. You can then, again, drill what are called recovery wells, pump that water back out. Particularly in these locations, you can put that water back into the CAP canal and you can deliver it to users in the future. We also partnered with Liberty Utilities, which is a private water company serving part of the West Valley here. We partnered with them to help them build an effluent recharge project that was called the Liberty Aquifer Recharge Facility. We spent, I think it was $6.5 million of our money to help them build this project. They now take effluent that they used to pay an irrigation district to take as a disposal method, and instead of doing that, they recharge that into the aquifer. And again, this is close to Luke Air Force Base, where all that subsidence has happened. It's also immediately within their service area, so it's replenishing the groundwater in the area where it's pumped. There are also what are called groundwater savings facilities, which are quote-unquote indirect recharge projects. Those are really irrigation districts that normally would be pumping groundwater. Under state law, if an entity, a party, provides a renewable water supply to an irrigation district that otherwise would be pumping groundwater, you can get a credit for recharge. Basically, it's a credit for the groundwater that they did not pump because they're using water that you provided to them. And we use two groundwater savings facilities in the West Valley. This is Tonopah, far out to the west, and this is Maricopa Water District. But these are the facilities in the West Valley, Phoenix, where we, the CAGRD, actually do the replenishment. So our members, primarily our members are water users that didn't, like I said, did not get the CAP subcontract back in the 80s, the early 80s. Some of them may have gotten a CAP subcontract, but it wasn't large enough to serve their long-term needs. And then other ones may have gotten a CEP subcontract, but they didn't have a way to get to it. They didn't have a treatment plant in order to deliver that water directly into their service area. So the Department of Water Resources required them, in order to demonstrate an assured water supply, to join the groundwater replenishment district. So basically, we are a backup for that, for the state, that if for any reason that water provider doesn't do their own recharge, doesn't put their water supplies to use, they have to report to us, and we replenish any groundwater that they use. So we have two types of members. One is called a member service area. That's where an entire municipality or a water company enrolls their complete service area as a member of Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District. And then we replenish on behalf of that entire service area. I'll talk about those a bit more in the future, in future slides. We also have member lands, and those are individual subdivisions. They're served by a water provider that doesn't have renewable water supply. They're not going to get an assured water supply, but they expand their service area. They serve new subdivisions, and those subdivisions have to enroll, as we call it, as a member land of the CAGRD. And I'll talk a little bit more about that process. Again, this is the same map of the West Valley, just to show you what we have in the West Valley is the city of Surprise is a member service area. El Mirage is a member service area. And Avondale and Goodyear are both member service areas. We really don't have any replenishment obligation for these member service areas, because typically they have their own renewable water supplies and they use the renewable water supplies, but they had to join the groundwater replenishment district in order to get a designation, primarily because they didn't have direct access. They didn't have a treatment plant for their CEP water. The city of Peoria used to be a member service area. They enrolled in 1997 when the assured water supply rules became in effect. They were able to de-enroll in 2011, but between 97 and 2011, Peoria was also a member service area. And these red outlines here are member lands. So you can see all of these subdivisions that are out here that I think all of you know the names of a lot better than I do, but you know, the big one is Verado. That is all member lands of the CAGRD, of the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District. And then just for scale, these are basically the outlines of the service areas of the private water companies that serve those lands. Those are their entire service areas. But you can see that a huge amount of the West Valley is in the CAGRD, this thing that most of you have never heard about. And just to make a point, virtually every single house that has been built in the West Valley since 1997 was built by virtue of being part of the CAGRD. Under the state water law, those houses could not have been constructed, they could have not been offered for sale without an assured water supply. So it was through membership in GRD that the majority of the houses that I think all of you sell as part of your day-to-day business are in one way or another associated with the CAGRD. And I'll talk a little bit about how they are. So this is what we would call a typical CAGRD subdivision. It's relatively new, relatively small lots, a little bit of turf, maybe a few pools scattered throughout. But overall, water use in these subdivisions is really pretty low. Our average for this kind of subdivision is about 0.2 or 0.25 acre feet per year per house. We also have some that are a little different. This is Camelback Farms or Camelback Garden Farms. Obviously, much larger lots, much larger homes, and a lot of water use. Now, the majority of the water use on these particular homes is actually provided by the irrigation district that this property is in. Something, though, that you need to be aware of is that some of that water that's provided to these homes could be groundwater. The majority of it is likely to be surface water, but depending upon the irrigation district, they will send a mix of groundwater and surface water to homes depending upon what supplies they have available to them. Water use on homes like this can be 5 or 6 acre feet per house. I'll just say that under our rates that we assess for our members, on this kind of a subdivision, it's about a 1/4 acre foot per house. Our rates are about $600 per acre foot. So it's about $150 that we assess on a house per year like this. On something like this, it could be more like $3,000 or $4,000. So something that you should be aware of when you're selling homes that are potentially member lands of the CAGRD is that the assessments that could be on their property taxes could be very high in order to pay for replenishment that we do on behalf of these homeowners. So let's talk primarily, you will, as realtors, you really won't see in a member service area, you really won't see anything that's related to the groundwater replenishment district because those service areas have joined as a member. They report to us every year how much total groundwater they used within their service area, and then we send them a bill, and then they incorporate those costs into the rates that they charge all of their members. It's a completely different system for what are called member lands. Those are direct assessments against that property by the groundwater replenishment district for us to replenish the water that they use. So the way that you become a member land is obviously you go through whatever jurisdiction's zoning and platting process is. And in order to become a member land of the groundwater replenishment district, and this is necessary to show an assured water supply to the state of Arizona, there is a declaration of CC&Rs that goes on all of that property. And primarily that requires them to pay assessments to CAGRD. So it's a condition that goes on the property, runs with the land, whoever owns it. We also enter into an agreement with the water provider that serves that land, and that requires that water provider to report to us how much water every parcel of land within their service area that is a member land, how much water they used within a year. So they send us a spreadsheet that lists parcel numbers and how much water they used that we then turn into assessments on that property. It's a very complex, well, not complex, but it's a very data-heavy process. We have some water providers that serve thousands and thousands of member land parcels. And if you think about, if you know anything about a water provider, they send their billings out by meter numbers, and they'll have a meter that's associated with the piece of property. We don't go by meter numbers, we go by parcels, because that's the collection process that we go through the state, through the county assessment process. So those water providers have to take their meter numbers and associate those with a parcel number in order to report to us. And it becomes a very cumbersome process on their part. It becomes a very cumbersome process on our part because we have thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of parcels that we have to work with every year. So in addition, the landowner, whoever the developer is, has to show that there is physical availability of groundwater. They can pump groundwater to serve that parcel. And then finally, at the end of all of this, the Department of Water Resources will issue a certificate of assured water supply for that subdivision. So our fees, basically, first they go to the landowner developer They pay an enrollment fee to become part of the groundwater replenishment district, and then they pay what we call AMDs, annual membership dues, to the district until such time as they develop the land. And the reason for these fees up front is so that we get money up front when this enrollment happens. These new members come on so that we have money to go buy the water to replenish on their behalf. So once a home builder buys a subdivision out of a larger development, then the home builders have to pay what's called an activation fee when they're ready to sell the house, to build and sell a house. And then they also pay what we call a replenishment reserve fee. Again, both of those are fees to provide us money to go buy water and put it in the ground to replace the future water use of that property. And then the home builder also pays the annual membership dues until such time as they sell the house. They have to pay the activation fee before they can get a public report for the property, before they can offer the lot for sale or the house for sale. And then once a homeowner buys the house, the homeowner pays the annual membership dues every year, and they also pay the annual assessments, and that's collected through the property tax mechanism. Perhaps I won't spend a lot of time on this, but basically this is a diagram because this whole process is so complicated that even our board members, oftentimes after they've heard it, time after time, they go, I don't really understand who pays what when, how this whole thing works. So actually, Jesse put together, working with our staff and a graphic artist, this diagram. But if you have questions, and I think you can look at this online, we tried to go through the whole process from the very beginning to the very end and describe what happens when and who pays what when. But the way that we work is, again, every year we have to calculate the assessments on all of these properties. Then we have to report those to the county assessor's office, and that goes on their property tax bill. It's a special assessment on their bill. Again, one of the things is we have to go through this process with the water providers of taking the water use that they associate by meter number, associate that with parcel number, and then send that out on the taxes. There's a lot of room for error in that whole process. And once it goes out on the tax bill, then it's really messed up if it's wrong. So our staff spends a lot of time doing QA/QC off of the database. They'll run a scan through it, and they'll look for differences from year to year on each parcel. Did this parcel just start using water? Well, why did it just start using water? Is it a new house? Was it unoccupied and now it's using water again? The water use went up, the water use went down. Why might it have gone up? Why might it have gone down? They look at the aerials, they look at all of these reports, and then they'll send potentially something to the water provider to say, okay, this is a 1,500 square foot house on a quarter-acre lot. The aerial shows there's no swimming pool and there's no landscaping. Are you sure they used 5 acre-feet of water last year? Again, about $3,000 worth of water. And we have a few of those that come through virtually every year. So we need to make sure that we get those assessments correct, because we definitely will hear from the homeowner at some point about the assessment. And again, we have to collect all of the cost for everything that we do just from our owners, even though all of these lands pay property taxes to CWCD. Those property taxes don't cover anything that the replenishment district does. Our members pay just for their use. So how does it affect the real estate business? Well, first, in order, again, to plat a subdivision, a developer may very well have to enroll that subdivision as a member land in the groundwater replenishment district. Then again, there's CCNRs that go on the land. The Department of Real Estate will not issue a home builder a public report in order to sell that house to its initial buyer unless they show proof that they have paid our fees, the GRD specific fees. They have to, the first buyer, there is a public disclosure to the first buyer that they're buying a property that is a member land of the groundwater replenishment district, not necessarily to subsequent buyers. But for subsequent buyers, it'll be noted in the title report that they are a member of the GRD. And this is just an example of what you would see in a title report, basically, in the listing of all the things associated with this property. You'll see things like this is the notice of the reporting by the water provider for reporting to GRD. And then this is the notice of the CCNRs on the property that are associated with being a member of the GRD. Again, in the West Valley, all of these cities are members of the GRD with a combined population of over 325,000. Again, all of the growth effectively that has happened in those areas since 1997 occurred because of the groundwater replenishment district membership. Otherwise, the home builders, the developers could not have built those homes without showing an assured water supply. We have over 550 member land subdivisions that have enrolled in the West Valley, and that represents over 130,000 housing units that are member lands of the GRD. So essentially, by membership in the GRD, we allow them economic development within their areas. The majority of our membership is in the West Valley. The majority of our member service areas, the majority of our member lands, the amount of water that we replenish on an annual basis is 80% in the West Valley. Again, the East Valley is not dependent on GRD. West Valley is almost fully dependent on GRD. And with that, I'll let Andrew talk a little bit about our water supply program. We have to go find renewable water supplies. So Andrew will talk about that. Thank you.
Is that just forward then flip it?
Yeah.
Okay. Good morning. As Dennis said, my name is Andrew Craddock. I'm with the water supply program, of which there's 3 individuals within the CAGRD that, like Dennis says, goes out and searches for water supplies to meet our replenishment obligation. And we're getting a little short on time, but just briefly, I've been with the water supply program for a little over 2 years. Prior to that, I was with the Department of Water Resources for 10 years. The last 5, I was the manager of the Recharge and Assured Water Supply program. So I was on the permitting, the analysis, the issuing of some of the recharge facilities that we've seen in the graphics of today, or issuance of the Certificate of Assured Water Supplies for member lands or designations of water supplies for the city. So this is kind of the flip side of that. We used to get through that approval process and then essentially hand it over to the GRD and Dennis's group, and their responsibility was to go find the water for these developments. And now I'm on the side of finding the water for all these developments that have approved over the previous 5 years plus. Sorry, I got slides kind of out of, am I going the wrong way? There we go. So approximately 5 years ago, the board passed a policy really kind of turbocharged the water supply program. And that was to go out and with the guiding principles, develop like we said, a robust water supply for the development of additional supplies to meet the replenishment obligation. And the approach being that there'd be diverse supplies of various types, long-term storage credits, which we talked about, the banking of water underground, turning into a long-term storage credit, which can be utilized. Also, we'll get into a little more detail of the supplies we currently have in hand, but CAP supplies, effluent supplies. Additionally, was when we enter into agreements with parties that we negotiate a voluntary and really important, a mutually beneficial arrangement with a city, town, a private water company, in some cases, some of our contracts and stuff with the federal government. We pursue multiple supplies, non-groundwater supplies simultaneously. We're moving to an era where the last 2012 to 2015, kind of when it was first, the guiding policy was passed, the purchase of a lot of long-term storage credits, which are needed, but kind of a low-hanging fruit aspect. And we're moving into an age now where we've reached out to most of the willing participants, and we're looking at more complex supplies and negotiations that take from months to many years to meet the future anticipated demand. And also to keep in mind assessing third-party impacts and potential mitigation strategies as necessary with local communities. And I'll back up here briefly. So in 2015, as Dennis said, when the annual reports come in, we audit those. We had an obligation of a little over 30,000 acre feet. Each obligation incurred in a calendar year must be replenished within 3 years. So for example, the 2015 obligation, we would need to have water supplies in hand and replenish those in years 2016, 2017, and completed by 2018. And this is a rolling annualized volume. Each year, and we have a plan of operation for the GRD. The current one runs from 2015 to 2024, where we identify supplies that we need in the near term, the 10 years of the current plan that we're in. We also look out 20 years into the future, what our obligations are projected to be, and then 100 years. And those you can see, those are the increasing volumes, which are very large numbers, but represent from the 2005 plan, that bottom number is about half of what we anticipated in 2005. Some of that has to do with the economy, the Great Recession of 2008, but large numbers nonetheless. So since 2012, the last 4 or 5 years, we have 20 authorized projects, and we have a whole list of them on our website under the GRD tab there. Current supplies in hand in the bottom right corner there, we have a little over 38,000 acre feet in supplies. So we've added a lot in the last 5 years. This is just a breakdown of our portfolio. CAP, M&I, can't remember if that was an acronym. Was that an acronym? The municipal industrial supply, that's a classification level within the CAP water supply. A little over 8,000 acre feet. Working on finalizing the White Mountain Apache tribe. That's the WMAT. 2,500 acre feet there. The NIA supply, which Dennis mentioned, which is still subject to shortage, right underneath the excess, which would be the first to go away. So that NIA supply has a reliability factor of about 2/3, meaning over a 100-year period, it would be available in that volume for 67 years out of the 100 projected. Or you could look at it kind of equally of being about 12,000 acre feet a year available over a 100-year period. Long-term storage credits, again, and these are volumes per 100 years. And 6,700, the effluent contract with Liberty, which is a 100-year contract. They're starting to store water this year, 2,400 acre feet, and that's where we get to that little over 38,000 acre feet available for replenishment currently each year. One other component Dennis mentioned was the replenishment reserve. When we're collecting our annual assessments, they go into different buckets. One, the water rights and infrastructure, which pays for future water supplies. The other is the replenishment reserve, which is, as Dennis mentioned, the CAGRD is kind of a backstop to the Department of Water Resources as far as issuing the certificates and the designations of assured water supply to subdivisions or cities and towns. Well, the replenishment reserve is kind of a backstop to the GRD's backstop. Should there be shortages or other interruptions in supplies, we can utilize the replenishment reserve. So people pay a component of that they pay each year of assessment goes into, in the first 25 years, goes into a replenishment reserve. What this can be utilized if needed to be called upon. Currently, statute has it that credits can be used after January 1st, 2013. Again, these statutes and stuff were written approximately 20 years ago. So that was a pretty far off date. Now we're getting relatively close to that amount. with permission of the ADWR director, we could tap into this reserve component if we needed to. One thing that does is prevent rate shock from people paying supplies, essentially not being able to utilize supplies for whatever availability reasons, going out on the spot market and buying a water that year can be highly expensive and may be difficult to complete within a year's time frame, just with the complexity of negotiations. So this allows for the replenishment reserve to be tapped into, which needs to be replaced in the immediate year, but it does provide some rate shock for people paying assessments. Both Director Graff and Dennis touched a little bit on Colorado River shortages, how that would affect the GRD and the water supply program. Losing access to the excess CAP or a year when the NIA water is not available. We have other supplies that are a little more firmed up, like the M&I allocation that we have, the White Mountain Apache that we'll have soon, hopefully in the next 12 to 18 months. Abundant long-term storage credits, effluent deals, and then again, that replenishment reserve, which has over 800,000 acre feet of credits that can be utilized in the 3 AMAs. We have a lot of those credits in Pinal AMA where we don't necessarily have the demand, so there are some complexities of getting those credits where the replenishment obligation is, but they are available. And that, besides dead pool being reached, the GRD has various water supplies of term and length to withstand prolonged shortages. So if we weren't able to meet our replenishment obligation, again, with that 3-year rolling average, if we weren't able to meet that, per statute and per assured water supply rules, essentially that puts a halt on enrollment of all new member lands, designation of assured water supplies, depending on the particular community. These are highly complex and unique documents. Depending on how that affected them, the designations may become jeopardized, temporarily jeopardized, or jeopardized for an extended period of time. But statutorily, our obligation to our constituents, to the homeowners, to replenish this groundwater would continue indefinitely. There's no mechanism to not allow, to stop growth that's coming in or to kind of de-enroll those people that are on the books involuntarily. Obviously, this would, for people in this room, making their livelihoods off of that would have some major disruption to the economy and especially the housing market. But again, with these redundancies, multiple redundancies in place, a robust, well-defined program, entering voluntarily with various sectors in the water community located in our service area and potentially more complex deals along the Colorado River, a lot of redundancies and assurances built in to the program to continue to meet our replenishment obligations today and into the future. I think that's all I have. Anyone has any questions for myself or Dennis? Yes. Well, for example, there are small, when Dennis was talking about the municipal and industrial allocations that went out primarily to larger cities, which is the preponderance of those issued. There are small irrigation districts that have small supplies, and that's where that 8,300 acre feet is. That's kind of been cobbled together from small water companies. So there's still a significant volume of those out there that people are paying the holding cost on, but maybe can't connect to the CAP infrastructure is one. And then Colorado River Supplies is really kind of where this program is focused. So those entities that have it there along the river, which is highly complex, both federally, state, when working with our constituents.
I'll try to touch on that. That's actually something that Jessica and I were talking about the other day, is trying to do an analysis of, what is the comparison. But I would say, generally speaking, when you have an entity like the city of Phoenix or Tucson, they're using renewable water supplies, which are more expensive. They've got a reclaimed water distribution system, much more expensive. So generally speaking, and I'm sure you'll hear more from Avondale, but generally speaking, the water rates in what we call a designated water provider are going to be significantly higher than the water rate is going to be, say, for a small private water company that is just pumping groundwater. It's pretty cheap to drill a well, build a storage tank, and build a small distribution system to deliver groundwater to houses. So I think there probably is a pretty good comparable, if you look at both the water cost and the assessments on the GRD versus the water cost in a larger service area. But we really we haven't done an analysis. It's kind of hard to compare that. But again, one of the points I was trying to make is, though, if you have an exceptional property, like some of those, they could be paying a lot. I mean, they'd be paying a lot from a city if they were using that much water, but they're going to see an assessment on their property tax that could be very significant. On the other hand, some of those houses, bluntly, the people don't care. It's a lifestyle that they're paying for. They want the turf, they want the grass, and they're willing to pay it. But not all of them understand that they're actually paying for that on their property tax instead of in their water bill.
Okay, with that, we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then if you want that CE. Lacey James give us your title.
I'm the Water Resource Manager.
Okay, and then Sean, what's your title?
Assistant Public Works Director.
Cindy was unable to make it, so Sean has graciously agreed to stand in for her. First of all, thank you both for coming. Welcome to WeMAR.
Thank you.
We're going to start out with a couple questions, and Andrew, did you get a chance to, Sean, did you get a chance to see the questions that I had said ahead of time? Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to start with Lacey. Okay. First of all, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your job?
Yeah, so I actually got my start here in the city of Peoria when I was 23 years old. I did not know what I wanted to do. I was going to school to be a nurse. And my microbiology teacher said, "You like microbiology, why don't you try and find a lab technician job somewhere?" And I said, "Okay, I'm kind of lost, don't really know where I want to go." And I wound up working for the Beardsley Water Reclamation Facility, which is on the Peoria and Sun City line, as their microbiology technician, while their microbiologist was off in Germany doing some work. And I thought, wow, this is a really amazing field. I wish when I was in high school somebody had told me about it. So I actually got accepted into nursing school and decided not to pursue that career and continued on and became the water quality inspector with the city of Peoria. And then I moved over to the city of Avondale about 4 years ago. So this will be my 10th year in the water industry. And I was the pre-treatment coordinator, and then just recently moved up into the water resource manager position. So.
And Sean, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your job?
Yeah. So as the assistant director in Avondale, I've been down there for 2 years. I help run the operation down there. Public Works in Avondale runs both water and wastewater services, but we also provide solid waste. We do street maintenance as well as fleet services. So I've been in Avondale for 2 years. Prior to that, I spent 12 years in the city of Peoria. So I started my career there as a utilities engineering manager. So I did the water and wastewater engineering for the city. And then I was shifted over into planning. So I was their engineering planning manager. So I did long range planning for the city, both water and wastewater. I continued that role, but also added transportation planning, land use planning, et cetera. So I got to see the breadth of Peoria and what they're moving forward with. And then prior to that, I was actually in the private sector as a civil engineer. So that's what my training is. So again, I've had a great opportunity to work in the private sector and build some infrastructure, work with municipalities. In the last 14 years has been as a municipal engineer or manager.
Great.
So, Lacey, we're going to start with you. Part of your job is managing the City of Avondale's water portfolio. So can you tell us what is a water portfolio and what mechanisms do you use to manage it?
Okay, yeah, so it was really great to follow Ben and then also Mr. Rule from the CAG Grid, because they kind of tie into all the cities. All the cities are kind of operate the same, but have their own little system. So in Avondale, we actually have a pretty rich portfolio. Our water, it consists of SRP water, which is Salt River Project. We're really fortunate. We're kind of at the end of the line, so we do have direct access to SRP water. We also have a CAP allocation, which Central Arizona Project allocation. And for our city, we have 5,416 acre feet, which is a pretty good allocation for a West Valley city. As Mr. Rule was kind of talking, that a lot of the West Valley cities didn't get a large portion of CAP water. And then another portion of our water portfolio is actually our effluent. We kind of view water, all water is pretty much in our cycle. So are you guys familiar with effluent and what that is? I've heard the term today, but I'm not sure if people are very familiar.
Yeah.
Okay, so effluent is actually treated wastewater. So in Arizona, we've been used to a very arid climate, so we've become very good at treating wastewater. And what we do in Avondale is we actually recharge that water into the aquifer through big recharge basins like they were showing up on CEP's PowerPoint. And that's what we also do in Avondale, and that becomes a part of our water portfolio as well.
Okay, and then Sean, with wastewater and water production and distribution and the water system safety being some of your responsibilities, how do you keep on top of all those areas?
We rely very much on Lacey's group. So. The one thing I've noticed in my time in the industry is that, the water and wastewater industry is very professional. People are very wanting to make sure that we follow standards. Obviously, I joke about Lacey's group, but obviously the regulatory group is very key. They're making sure that the samples are taken at the consistency they're needed to meet all the regulations and standards so that we can ensure that we are providing a safe product to our customers. So we look at it as providing, water 24/7. Effectively, anytime you turn on your faucet, we provide it. And also, we mentioned the waste stream is that we also take that away from you. We take that waste product and we bring that back in through the treatment, through the effluent cycle to bring it back into our water cycle overall. So again, I think it's just, ensuring that we follow the standards, which is really coming down to our staff and relying on our staff.
And then, so now that we're into the standards, let's talk about, and this is for both of you, so you both probably have different parts of this answer. You both deal with the regulatory compliance issues, state and federal. So can you tell us which state and federal agencies regulate you and their reporting requirements?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. So I'm over the regulatory section for the city of Avondale, and so we have, on the water resource side, we're also regulated by the state, which is the Arizona Department of Water Resources. So it's just like a big bank account. It's kind of how I look at a water portfolio. It's just like your home income. How much is your mortgage? How much is your car? And how much is your income? Can it cover all of that? And that's exactly how we manage that side. But then we also have to report that to the state because they do regulate. You have to make sure that you're meeting safe yield. So you can't be overdrafting your checking account. You can't be going into your savings and at some point you're going to go out of your savings. So it's the same kind of balance, but we also have to prove that through regulations by submitting an annual report to ADWR. And then on the water quality side, we are regulated by the EPA, which is Environmental Protection Agency. And here in Arizona, ADQ, which is the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, they have primacy. So it actually filters down to a state level where they actually regulate us. And we have the Clean Water Act, which is on the wastewater side. So our wastewater treatment plant, when they discharge their effluent either to the Agua Fria or to our recharge facility, they have to meet effluent water quality standards, which is established through the Clean Water Act. We can't just be discharging, whatever type of constituent that we want. And then on the drinking water side, we have to meet the Safe Drinking Water Act. So those are two different acts. So clean water is wastewater, safe water is your drinking water standards. And we have a team of water quality inspectors who are out all the time taking samples actually from the distribution system. So when I was here at the city of Peoria, you may see like little metal posts throughout your neighborhood, and you may see somebody out there with this little bottle, clear bottle, and they're flushing a lot of water. And I always heard, we're in a drought, why are you wasting so much water? I always used to hear that. And it's, well, we have to test the water to make sure it's safe to drink. So we have staff out in the field taking samples every single day. And in Avondale, we actually don't have our own lab. We have to contract it out to a state certified lab. And so we also have to generate a consumer confidence report. And I do have a bag to give out to you guys. And I wanted to show you. Avondale has a very unique CCR because we found that most people are really bored by Safe Drinking Water Act regulations and they could really care less. So we thought, well, let's make this something that's fun. And so we came out with an annual calendar. And this is actually our CCR. And inside it has all the results from all of our Safe Drinking Water Act tests that we've done throughout the year. And we find that this is really popular and people are actually reading it. So, and we love to take this out. So I do have about 11 of these. And if you guys are interested, I can take your information and give you them. So there are a lot of regulations that come into water, but I'm really happy there are a lot of regulations. As a mother, when about 8 years ago, my mom called me. She said, you forgot to drop off the water bottle for Dominic's bottles. And I said, well, just use the faucet, it's okay. She said, well, that's not safe, I can't use that. And I said, Mom, I oversee all the water quality for Peoria. I'm doing the sampling, the analysis, it's safe. And that was the moment that I realized how important water quality is. And yes, regulations may be a pain in the butt, but when you're drinking that, you want regulations behind that. You want to know that you're drinking something that is safe. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, and just to add to that, obviously there are the federal and state guidelines, but each municipality will actually have their own standards, more not so towards water quality, but towards water infrastructure standards, as far as being able to provide that water when residents need it. So in Avondale, we have what's called the general engineering guidelines, and then there's also city code, which requires us to have a sort of our infrastructure in place to make sure that, again, when you turn on your faucet, it's available, and that we can take away that waste stream for you. So, but largely it is the state and federal regulations that we need to comply with.
Okay. So how much time, money, staff is required for you to maintain compliance with those regulations? And are there any redundant regulations that if you could wave a magic wand, you would get rid of?
Well, so my budget for my group is around $3 million, and we're a pretty small group. Most of that money is actually spent on just purchasing CAP water and SRP water, and the rest of it goes to staff who is actually overseeing water quality and then also our contract with our laboratory. So it does cost a pretty penny, but it's something that we plan for. We have a 5 to 10 year projection, and we work really close with the regulators, so we kind of have an idea of what are upcoming regulations, so we can start planning those for our budget. Any type of regulation that I wish I could wave a wand, I guess, would be recently working with they're trying to just discharge a well site. I guess that's the one area I think I wish there's a lot of red tape where I have a corridor, I'm trying to discharge a well, and I'm discharging it right into McFlood, ADOT, and Army Corps of Engineer, and trying to maneuver through that red tape does take a lot of work. So I wish I could make things a little bit easier in that area.
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's anything, again, working with outside agencies would be nicer. I don't know if there's any regulations to eliminate, just making sure everybody's clear of their roles. Just to echo and add to what Lacey said about the amount of money she spends, overall in Avondale, we have about just over 50 full-time employees dedicated to just providing water and wastewater services for the city. We're just about 8,000 people, and our annual budget towards water and wastewater services is about $19 million.
So following up, you mentioned the Army Corps of Engineers. The EPA, the Army Corps of Engineers, and the Department of Interior have all recently seen changes with the new administration. So how do those changes impact you and the management of your municipal water systems?
Well, I think everyone's just trying to find their footing right now with the change of the administration. And the thing I see most is just what Sean was saying is the communication between all the different organizations. You have federal, state, and local. And it does make it difficult because we are kind of all separated and we all kind of speak a different language. And right now with just the change of the federal agencies, everything's kind of like in the air. I think everyone's trying to figure out where they're going to land. And so that can kind of back up projects, and it can also, the communication for us at the local level can be sometimes difficult.
Yeah, again, it is a coordination between the agencies. I know in a lot of cases, a lot of the federal agencies over the years have actually their staffing's been reduced. The budget issues for many years there have actually really restricted it. My experience when I was in Peoria, we were planning a pipeline to cross the Agua River to connect the Estancia development to the main Peoria system. So just before I left, we actually got the agreement in place for the contractor, our developer, to actually start the construction of that project, but we crossed Bureau of Land Management property. So now it's 2 years later, and they still haven't started that project because Bureau of Land Management can't dedicate the resources to actually review the application. So it can be difficult.
Yeah, let's hope they get that.
Yeah. We were seeing that a lot too with like ADQ. I think the sense of regulation is so negative that they have really lost a lot of good employees at ADQ. And of course, at the local level, when we hear we're going to get an inspection, it's not fun for us. But on the other side of it, it's like if there's no checks and balances and there's not a benchmark for us to perform to, and we know that we're not going to be held at a standard, there may be water purveyors that maybe don't perform to those standards that they should. So I'm not saying I like being inspected or audited, but it holds us to a benchmark, and it also gives management and city manager support to actually put in money into that infrastructure or that treatment process that actually secures it for the future. So I think that is really important. I'm not saying that I love it, but there has to be some type of benchmark for us to perform to.
So now Lacey just mentioned future water supplies. So Sean, how do you go about, as part of what you do, identifying those future water supplies?
Well, we go through a fairly exhaustive engineering study. The city's actually undertaking an integrated utility master plan right now, which is updating some documents that were really last updated in 2010. Most jurisdictions will do this on a cycle 5-7 year type of cycle, which is looking at that. Obviously, you can't just make water. We've highlighted the fact that this valley is blessed with the fact that we have a fairly robust aquifer, but because of over pumping over years, that was actually getting the point where it was being stressed. And we do have the CAP water supply that comes through, and then we also have the SRP lands. Not all of Avondale is in SRP lands, but a large portion is, and that helps secure that supply. So, and then I think the shift in the last several years has been towards the effluent. Before it was get rid of that, treat that wastewater, and then get rid of that water. Well, now I think there's been a shift in the last probably 20 plus years saying, well, that's actually a water resource. You put it in the ground, you can withdraw that. So for us, we have to look at, we just can't go out and with a checkbook and we wish we could and just say buy water rights wherever we wanted to. We also have to look at the physical availability, how we get it into it. So it's not just one question we're trying to answer, which is how to get more water. It's how do we get more water, how do we deliver it, how do we treat it, how do we give it to our citizens. So it's really through our master planning exercises. We're doing, again, one right now with Avondale. We're looking at all our systems, how they can meet the demands for the next 10 years, but also looking further out and looking at our general plan land use and seeing what Avondale could become based on what the city's vision for itself, and then what water supplies do we need to provide that, and then working backwards, what infrastructure you need, then going back into, well, how do we get the wet water to that infrastructure?
So Lacey, Garden Lakes is a really pretty scenic little lake community out there in Avondale. It has catch and release fishing, so people really love it. It's one of the reasons why a lot of people who buy houses there because they love that access. Can you tell us its main purpose though, and how you choose the fish that stock it and those plants that grow in the middle of that lake? Is that a problem? Is that good?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So did you guys all get the little pamphlet on the Crystal Garden Lakes? Was that kind of passed around?
I've gone out.
Oh, okay. Some people got it. But Crystal Garden Lakes is actually our surface water treatment plant. And I actually have a friend in the audience here who I know lives in Crystal Garden Lake. And so we built that about 20 years ago. So I think next year is going to be our 20-year anniversary. And I just, when I first came to Avondale, I came from Peoria where we have surface water treatment plants. That was the first thing I asked is, well, where's your surface water treatment plant? And they said, we don't have one. I said, you guys don't have a surface water plant? Like, this isn't even a city to me. You don't have a surface plant. And they said, no, we have Crystal Garden Lakes. And I just was, I guess, just kind of taken back. I thought, wow, I'm not sure about this. And so over the years of managing it, it's really innovative. It's where we built this lake system for our residents to enjoy, and we have houses around it, and there's catch and release. But it actually is our surface water treatment plant. So the lakes are hooked up to the SRP canal, the Salt River Project Canal, and we could also deliver our CAP water through that. At this time, we don't, but we could if we needed to. And so that SRP, the Salt River Project water, actually flows into those lakes. And there's about 27 lakes, I believe, and they're all gravity fed. And it goes through a denitrification process where the surface water has high nitrates just from like agriculture, and also sometimes SRP blends surface water and groundwater. In our area, groundwater is really high in nitrates. So we stock the lakes with mostly with we had white emer, we have koi, and then we just did a huge stocking of tilapia. And we found a business owner in Avondale who is actually starting up a fish farm. So we have connected with him, and we figured, well, this is a great deal. He's actually growing fish for us, and he's a local business. And he's been stocking our lakes, and they are like the most hardy tilapia we've ever had. We usually have a die-off of tilapia every year, and this last year, we know around the month that they all die off. So we had our crews ready to go, and we lost like 100 fish, and that was all. And so the fish are actually really important to our treatment process. And then the plants that you're referring to are called bulrush, and we actually did plant those. And that also is a part of the denitrification process. And so coming into the wetlands, the nitrate levels they can range from like a 5 to 9 milligrams per liter, which is pretty high. And then at the end of the process, we're seeing a 0.5 milligrams per liter. We're not using any power, we're not using any chemicals, we're not behind a wall where the public can't enjoy our facility. So from my first day at Avondale to now, my position on the wetlands is very different. It was just a culture shock for me, and you can tell the residents just love it. So we do have full-time staff that are out there maintaining it, cleaning out the lakes every day. And then so once the wetlands, the water moves through the wetlands, it takes about 48 hours. We drop it into a main collection pipe, and then that pipe transfers over to our recharge facility. And then we recharge 100% of our SRP water. And then that becomes part of our portfolio, where then we are what we're called a recovery system. So we do have surface water, but we are pumping from the aquifer, but it's not groundwater, it's recovered water. Mm-hmm. And so it's a really vital piece of our infrastructure, but I think sometimes it's overlooked, and they just see it as, oh, those ponds over there, and it's like, well, no, those aren't just ponds, that's our surface water treatment plant. And it's a really unique system. I haven't seen one like that I think anywhere in the United States. They have one or two, but it's only for effluent. It's not actually for their surface water portfolio.
So I'm going to ask a question, and I don't know if either one of you knows the answer to that, but what gave the city of Avondale the idea to do it this way? Do you know the answer?
Being that's 20 plus years ago, I don't. I could see it where, again, the fact that we can now take our full allocation of SRP water supply, take away that nitrogen. Lacey mentioned between 5 and 9 milligrams per liter coming in. The regulation level is 10.
Yeah.
So we want, if you put 5 to 9 and you're recharging the ground, you're probably going to be pulling that much back out. So we want to eliminate that constituent going back into the ground, which are our wells. We don't have to deal with reaching that level. I just have to assume someone, and I understand it also went with the development. So there was a development agreement for that developer that, again, that's interlaid within that community. And they want to make sure that it was an amenity, but it was a city-built amenity for the residents, but something that's a huge benefit for the city overall and their water portfolio.
That's great.
I've asked because I was curious, who thought of this, and it was kind of like a secret gem. I've actually lived in the West Valley almost my whole life, and I had never ventured to Avondale before I worked there, and I was like, wow, I'm really surprised they have this and they don't, publicize it a little bit more. And so I started doing a little bit of digging, and it kind of looks like the idea of it did tie back to the developer and then an ASU professor and a consultant from California who wanted to test this out, and it wound up being very successful. And so that's where it's come to, and with it being 20 years next year, its birthday, I was thinking about seeing if I could find those people who actually had the concept and bring them out for a celebration. Yeah.
That's great. Let us know about that if
Okay.
that happens. We'd be interested in that. So Sean, when it comes to water system safety and maintaining a potable water supply for all of your businesses and residences, what are your top 3 concerns?
Those would be, Lacey indicated, I look at it as making sure we have legal availability to water. So that's our paper water. What water can we bring into the city, and do we have enough allocation to meet the demands? Then we have the physical availability of that. Again, I talked earlier about, we can have all the water resources, access to CAP Canal, but how do we get that wet water into the city? So that's the second portion of it. So that goes down to, in our case, we're very successful in using our well field to provide that source. And the third is really being able to make sure the distribution system can work. So those are my top 3. So we have paper water, we have the legal availability to the water, we can physically access it, and then making sure that our system, and the system is really the reservoirs, the pumps, and the pipelines can then convey the water to our residents as they need it. Because if you're not aware, the system has what we call a diurnal curve. So in the morning, everybody wakes up, they start their coffee, maybe do some laundry or something like that. So there's a real big demand in the morning time that peters off. Then we have a second demand later in the afternoon. And that entire curve shifts up and down during the season. So in the summertime, we have to provide about twice the amount of physical water to our residents than we have to do in the wintertime. Outdoor irrigation, pool evaporation is a big portion of that, but also indoor water use goes up. So it's those 3 things, legal availability, physical availability, and our distribution.
Great. So Lacey, a couple months ago in one of your presentations, you had mentioned that Avondale accesses wells. Several of these wells are on former farmland. How do you maintain these old wells? How do you know when the water is safe to drink? And how do you determine the amount of water available in those wells?
Yeah, so with Sean's integrated water master plan that we're doing right now, it's kind of giving us a forecast of where we are now, where we're going to be in 10 years, and then all the way up to 2030, I believe.
No, actually, we're doing build out.
Build out. So it's right now we're kind of looking, we need more wells. So that's kind of something that my focus has been with my team, water resource and regulatory. But then also when I came into the position, one of my goals was to marry my position more into operations because 5 years ago, it was like water resource and regulatory wouldn't speak to operations. It was like this weird wall. And when I came in, I said, we have got to break down this wall because you cannot have water resources if you don't have the actual bolts and nuts to get it to the people, and it was always like, he was talking paper water and wet water, and it was like resources was talking about paper water all the time, but They wouldn't talk to operations about, okay, what pipeline are you really going to get it there? How are you going to boost it there? So that's been a main focus. And so we've been looking into more well sites. And we have several old ag wells that we have acquired. And believe it or not, the wells that were drilled in 1920 by the old farmers are amazing wells. You know, they really knew how to drill their wells. Of course, we have to go in and do rehab, and we have to realign them, put new motors and booster pumps into them. And you know, we have one well that's coming up right now that we're going to rehab, and it's going to be about $2 million to rehab that well.
Yeah, something like that.
Around 2.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's not cheap, but they're a hole in the ground, and we have to do a lot of water exploration. So I have my team out knocking on home doors that are out in little county areas or other, you know, ADWR has, you know, different well sites in our area, or RID, and we're saying, hey, can we test the water out of your well to see what the water is like in this aquifer? Because to do a test drill just to see what the water quality is like is around $1 million just to test it. So if we can go around and knock on doors and see what the water quality is like from private wells, we can at least kind of pinpoint where to drill or where to move our focus.
Oh, wave a hand. We were sitting too still.
Just some jumping jacks. So yeah, we really do want to do a lot of research because we have found that actually the best water quality in our city is right next to our recharge facility. So our recharge facility is right on the east bank of the Agua Fria and McDowell. And we've been kind of testing well sites around it. And the well site that we're looking at right now, the biggest thing that we battle in our aquifer are nitrates. We just get killed with nitrates. So we'll look at a well, put all this money into it, we test it, and it's high nitrates. So either you have to go through treatment or you just abandon it. And treatment is not cheap. It's extremely expensive. So the wells that we're looking at right now that are around our recharge facility, we're seeing nitrates around 2, and the maximum contaminant level is 10. So 2 for us is like striking oil. It's great. So if we can find more of those, that would be really good.
So Avondale is part of an AMA. Can you explain how that impacts development and how you go about meeting the state law requirements to show an assured water supply?
Yes. So when Dennis was up here talking about CAGRID, so that I was really glad that he went before me because, as you could see, that was pretty complex, and that's just one component of our assured water, or our designation of assured water supply. So because we are in an AMA, we have to demonstrate safe yield. So when he was showing that area around Luke Air Force Base where the ground had actually dropped 30 feet, that was kind of the whole point of an AMA. It ties back to the 1980 Groundwater Management Act. And that's where you cannot pump more than you put in. So that's why we are really good about putting in renewable sources into our aquifer that we pump from so that we're meeting that safe yield. And so a designation of assured water supply, you have to demonstrate to the state that you have renewable water supplies that can last 100 years. If you don't have that designation, then developers cannot come into your city. So, or they would have to have their own designation of assured water supply. So if you want to have growth in your city, you have to have a designation of an assured water supply. It's just something that you have to have, or you're going to have these little, when you saw Dennis's presentation, you had little red spots kind of all over the place. Those are areas that aren't in a designated area that they have to actually just go find their own water. So in Avondale, we have our designation, and that actually will expire in 2025. So we'll have to refile and go through all of those motions again to prove that we have the water supply for 100 years.
All right, so follow-up question to that, and you may be able to, both of you might be able, how long does it take to, that's got to be a long process to recertify?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, and part of that, we talked about the master plan. A lot of that is the theory, the water supply will look at, again, as the city signs off and through a development entitlement and signs a final plat, that's our assurance that we have 100 years supply on that land, and that rides with that property as it moves forward. So obviously, we're keenly aware as development comes in, how much water, we only have a finite bucket of water for Avondale to distribute, and it's largely based on the general plan where we think development's going to occur, so we have to watch that. So it is a lot of paperwork. It takes a while to make sure the filing goes through, and then working with the Arizona Department of Water Resources, we talked about, it's one of those agencies that has been stressed with lack of resources over the years, that we can get in and assure that.
So if you have to restart, do you allow a couple of year period for that recertification?
At least.
Yeah. So I actually brought a checklist just to kind of go through what you have to get your assured water supply. You have to do a demand assumptions for your service area. So you have to look at demand on project, and in Avondale we have what's called on project and off project land. So half of our city is actually called on project land because we have SRP land. So SRP is very complex, but their water is very cheap for us. They're about $25 an acre foot compared to CAP water, which is around or over $100 an acre foot. So we have to really maximize our SRP water, and we have to also really watch what we order, because when we order our SRP water, we have to use it within the same month we order it. We're not allowed to bank it. So CAP water, we can bank it. Our effluent, we can bank it. Our SRP water, we have to try and have a crystal ball of what our residents are going to consume that month, and we have to order it a month before. So it's a balancing act. So you have to demonstrate all that for the assured water supply. And then you have to have current demands, your committed demands, and then you have to show them your projected demands and show that you can adequately cover all of those. Supply assumptions. So you have to show them your bank statements. What type of water do you have? What are your contracts? How long are they? So City of Avondale will be coming into NIA water, and Dennis was talking about that, the White Mountain Apache Tribe water. So we're hoping we'll come into that. That'll be a new source for us. It'll be a new bucket, which there's not a lot of new buckets of water in Arizona. So when you do get one, you do pay for it. So that's around 800 acre feet. It's not a ton of water, but it's still something. And not all of it is M&I water, which is that municipal and industrial water. Only 200 acre feet of that is. So that's secure for us, but the rest of it's all NIA water, which in time of drought, it could be cut. So that's something else that they look at when they're, going over your assured water supply application. They look at all your recharge and your recovery. So again, they're looking at how much water we're recharging and how much water we're taking out of the ground, balancing our books. They're looking actually at all of our well pumps. They're digging into the accounting. How much are you pumping from each well? And have those levels dropped out. So we're always continuously looking at the water level. We can't just keep pumping as much as we want and dropping the aquifer. We have to also make sure that a lot of our pumping is done within 10 miles of our recharge facility, so that we're continually refilling that aquifer. We're not just stripping it. And we also have to show them our long-term storage credits. And Avondale has a very large long-term storage credit system. We are at 73,000 acre feet of long-term storage credits, and that's huge for a city of our size. Our staff over the years have been really good at making sure to purchase extra water whenever it's available, and also managing the water portfolio so we can recharge it and bank that water credit. And so that amount of water could actually last the city of Avondale 6 years. We could pump groundwater for 6 years and not have to take any renewable sources. So, yeah.
That's pretty amazing, yeah. So Sean, Avondale is building and expanding, and it has plans, and they're renewing their city plans as well. So how do you, from your perch overseeing all of these things, how do you determine where and when to build the new infrastructure and storage facilities? I know that's one thing you've touched on a couple times. How do we get the water to the location it's needed? And how do you, in balancing that infrastructure, how do you balance between supplies to agriculture, to commercial and to residential and prioritize those decisions?
Let me answer the first part first. Is the last part first? Sorry. Is when we look at the city's water portfolio, we largely base it on the general plan. If you're not familiar with the general plan, that's the large land use where the city will say, I want different types of residential, where the commercial areas, where agricultural is. As a municipal water supplier, we're not providing to agricultural. As that land comes from agricultural into development, usually there'll be a water, if there's a well associated with that, maybe there's some allocation of water that comes with it. So, but we're really looking at it from the standpoint of what land uses the city's elected officials and even the citizens, because every 10 years the general plan is actually voted on by the citizens, has said they want the city to be the vision, and we try to allocate water portfolio, a portion of the water portfolio to each one of those land uses, and that tallies up to effectively our total bucket. Can we provide water for this if we move forward? That's obviously the big vision, and we work that back down to where are we at right now, and then where do we think development is going to occur in the next 10 years for impact fee eligible projects, or longer terms, then we can figure out how we finance it. Because one of the biggest things we have to deal with is how to finance these things. When we start talking about a surface water treatment plant, you're talking $100+ million just to get in and to open a plant up. That's a large capital investment. We have to look at how you could pay for that. Do we have bonding authority? Can we use ratepayers to pay for that? It's for new growth. Therefore, is it impact fee eligible? What the impact fees usually come after the fact. You usually get impact fees after a permit's pulled, so you have to actually build the infrastructure in advance. So it's one of the trickiest things I've learned is actually how to manage the finances. We have basically enterprise fund. Usually it's water and wastewater. They're separate funds within the city, so they're not used for other things, and they're used to set the rates. And those enterprise funds then pay for both the operation of the system, which we have to forecast out how much money we're going to need, and also for the capital improvements, which are the larger improvements. When we talk about booster stations, Avondale is actually in a good situation. We have, through the last boom, we built a large amount of reservoir and booster storage. We actually have one site that's actually offline right now. The problem is we don't have a source water that doesn't have high nitrates or arsenic or something else that we have to treat there. So we've actually set that aside. I've used mothball. It's just sitting there unused right now, so we have to figure out when to bring that back online. But yeah, a lot of it's just planning, look at the infrastructure that we have. How do we meet these demands? We actually have seen our demands grow in the last couple of years. Avondale itself has not grown significantly in the number of dwelling units, but we've had more commercial demands, and then our residents are using more water per household. We were thinking that they're getting a little better with watering their landscape. They're not cutting back as much, but that means that it's stressing our system a little bit more. So it's a juggling act. Every year we look at our capital program and our operating budget, see if we have to increase that. With our capital program, we look out 10 years horizon on that, and then we have to build that back into a rate model to see, do we have the funds to pay for this, or ask the council to authorize a rate increase? If we were a private entity, we'd go in front of the Corporation Commission. Because we're a municipal entity, we can go in front of our council to authorize that approval for rate increases to pay for the operation.
Okay. And then one last question for each of you. What would you like realtors and their clients to know about the city of Avondale and their water system?
What do I want them to know about Avondale's water system? That we have a really robust water system. We have really dedicated employees. A lot of our employees are actually residents of Avondale, and I know a lot of us are behind walls, so you don't see us. We refer to ourselves underground and behind walls, so the public do not see us like you would see the parks facilities or the road management people. But we have a lot of people who are working day and night, making sure that we serve our residents safe, reliable drinking water, and also other services like wastewater. And that's just something that I never knew before I came into this industry, is I actually never gave it much thought. I drove by the Beardsley wastewater plant for 10 years going to school and never really cared to look what was over the wall. So if there's anything I can let you know, is that we're really dedicated to what we do. A lot of us don't enter into this field to make a lot of money. We do it because we really do love it. You start talking to any of us who are in the water industry, and we won't stop talking about water. You'll probably be bored to death. But it's because we really have a passion for it, and in this arid climate, water management is extremely important.
Sean?
I just echo the professionalism of our staff. I think is second to none. You know, both Lacey and I have worked in the same two municipalities, and I think, you know, in both cases, I won't put Peoria down, but I believe Avondale's got a very, very highly trained, skilled staff that are dedicated to making sure that we have, we can continuously provide the water supply today. And then we also have the staff that are looking out in the future. How do we make sure that we can provide for that? You know, we do know that growth is happening, and we're planning for that growth. We talked earlier in the presentation, we're trying to look for that next water supply, that next well to bring it on, so we have the reliability and redundancy for our system. So, Avondale has a very good, safe system. We have some unique aspects to it with our wetlands project, which is kind of neat. It's part of a community amenity as well as a water treatment plant for us. But we do have the water supplies, and we're more than willing to work with the developers to come in and add to our inventory, our customer base.
There you go. Great. I would like to thank both Lacey and Sean for coming. A quick reminder, this is being recorded, and we'll have information on how to access it by tomorrow on the WeMAR GAD website, wemargad.org, and your certificates are out in the hallway for those of you who decide to get credit. Thank you very much for coming.